In my part of Europe, the only places you can really find old growth forests or ecologic maturity are in the lands attached to old palaces or botanical gardens, which only exist because in most cases they used to belong to nobility or industrialists. And I love visiting. You get this little peephole into nature's potential that you can't really find anywhere else. The thing is, I also get really conflicted when I go, because first, the only reason these places exist is thanks to a legacy of a massive exploitation of thousands, if not millions of people, which apart from just not sitting right with me ethically, isn't really a path accessible to anyone except the ultra-rich. And second, I couldn't actually live in places like this because, very practically, I can't live anywhere where there's nothing to eat. If the only ways to shelter and clothe myself are to take them from someone else, then someone else is always going to be trying to take it from me. And if I were to get stuck in one of these places, if it were an island I had crash-landed in, I'd have to start cutting down trees. They would not survive my need to eat and stay warm. So with all that in mind, and given that we really don't live in a living world, how do we craft a living world? How do we create places where nature is fundamentally respected, where people can be involved and supported, and maybe the real challenge here, how do we get there without exploiting anyone? It's sad, but we can't just let people loose on the planet and expect things to go well. And I'd argue a big part of that is thanks to this paradigm where people are over here and nature is over there. That basically ensures ecologic harm will be a part of most everything we do. Because while holding nature at a distance keeps the world safe from us, it also makes sure that we forget nature. Keeping wild places at a distance makes it really easy to never actually experience the indirect ways that our lifestyles undercut the foundation of life on the planet. And it doesn't leave any space for care for the natural world to inform the ways we live. If we want to live in a living world, I think we need to bring those together. And I'm not talking about parks or nature zones. Those are lovely, and I would love more of them. But what we need here goes a bit beyond somewhere we can go to garden for a few hours to improve our mental health. Fundamentally, I think we need to construct our lives in a way that people are brought into nature, not as caretakers or stewards who show up every now and again for some little ecologic act, but as necessary members of the ecosystem. And obviously that's a huge ask. Figuring out how to get today's people into nature in a way that actually helps the world is, frankly, crazy to expect. It's not a change that's going to happen on its own. Because you can't do it by just learning some facts about ecology or how to make compost. We also need to make some fundamental changes in our nervous systems and social skills. We need to learn how to notice that who we are before we step into a field to plant a tree and what we believe will shape how that tree will be able to grow. Things like our individualism, profit-seeking, and desire for short-term rewards will shape the systems we design. And those systems will actively push us away from developing the contextual, patient, and communitarian skills we're going to need to be able to take care of nature at any scale that actually makes any difference. Basically, if we're going to learn to become people who can be let loose in the world and reasonably expect the world to benefit from us, we need to approach care for nature as a craft. And there's a lot of skills that go into that craft, but I want to focus on 3 that I think are the most important here. And only the first of those 3 has to do directly with ecology, because we do still need to level up our ecologic knowledge. Most ecologic corners of YouTube focus on this, so I'm not going to linger too long here except to say that as you do your research, keep in mind that most ecologic methodologies tend to be pretty fragmented. Almost every organic project I've ever seen succeeds by excluding wild nature, and most ecologic projects support wild nature by excluding people. Everything either puts humans at the center or tries to remove us from the equation. And for us to survive, you really need a system that brings those opposing strategies together. We need to stop building ecosystems around our needs and beliefs to find a way to balance the needs of all species and be able to act in a way that nature would actually benefit from the full range of human activity. And I'm not trying to say that everything needs to be human. It plainly doesn't. I'm saying that everything we do touch needs to shine, which is a much bigger and much harder task than it sounds, because on top of all the necessary ecologic study and experience that we need, there's also a lot of unlearning that has to happen before that ecologic knowledge can actually take root. A lot of learned selfishness and stories that direct us to try and control ecosystems towards guaranteed outcomes, instead of allowing the sovereignty of nature to shine through. And I mean, it's going to be hard enough just getting people to even consider that it's not an absurd notion to think that nature could even have sovereignty to begin with. But without sovereignty, and without trying to balance it with our needs, the most important ecologic advances will always be beyond our reach, because we'll keep making the mistake of trying to make the work about us, or what we think is right, or just about what we need. And we'll let those determine our course of action, instead of letting what nature actually wants inform our decisions. Next, we've got to go somewhere a bit beyond ecology, somewhere that for me is probably the most important place we can go. So I'm going to give it the biggest chunk of the video, because you might be looking at me in this forest and thinking, that's the answer. This guy's got it figured out. But I really do not. One guy and his brother can't make a living world. What we've got here is an island. If you're going to dream about a living world, then there's an expectation of a certain scale that just me and him will never be able to reach on our own. Just my one neighbor probably cuts more trees every month than I've planted in my entire life. And I've planted more trees than the average bear. The fact is that if I'm ever going to see a living world, I need a lot of other people to plant and care for trees until they become forests. And it'll probably take millions of people collaborating before my forest connects to yours. Honestly, I don't think I can support the planet without learning to support other people first. And I mean really supporting people, not just trading tips and tricks over dinner or taking a spare afternoon to help someone out. I'm talking about a structural support strong enough to outcompete the rest of humanity's destructive effects. Any problem getting in the way of caring for the planet belongs to everyone, because the consequences affect us all. If my neighbor's too broke to plant some trees, then guess what's not going to happen? If my friend feels too alone to undertake a project as large as ecologic restoration, then guess what they're not going to do? If we're going to make an upward spiral of regeneration capable enough to address climate change and the biodiversity crisis, then we've got to go way beyond what's culturally expected of us, beyond even what's expected in most alternative circles. Because what most of us are doing is trying to insulate ourselves from other people's problems, where what we need to be doing is, very carefully, figuring out how to make other people's problems our problems. And that's not me saying that you should go out and help the first person you see or everyone you know. That would be a recipe for burnout. Support can be invigorating and fulfilling, but it can also be really draining. If you're doing it right, it'll probably take you out of your comfort zone and make you do a bunch of stuff you'll find scary, uncomfortable, irrational, or unconventional. Because helping someone can be as simple as giving them money, connections, or resources, which is easy enough to give away when you've got those to give, but it can also stretch you to give a lot of what you don't have to give. It can highlight how bad you are at some things, trigger you in 1,000 different ways, and all the while push you to accept that you need to be the one that's changing, because you have to grow into a person that someone else needs you to be. Basically, what we do for our families, we sometimes need to do for strangers, which doesn't mean for anyone. Being discerning with who we help is also pretty important here. There's a lot of people and projects out there that look good on the surface, but are only doing what they're doing to make themselves big and take your money. There's a lot of people who will take the promise of a better tomorrow to drain you for their benefit, and they might not even know they're doing it. So my recommendation stop looking for projects that are likely to succeed, or that make you feel good about yourself, and instead, look for projects worthy of binding yourself to. Look for people who, one day, you'd like to trust with your capacity to survive, and be on the lookout for people who are unpolished, broke, or who seem incapable of actually succeeding on their own, because they're the ones that need your help. It's obviously not that easy, though. We all want to help each other, but we don't all have that freedom to make it a reality. For a lot of people, helping others has become a bit of a luxury. If you look at something like Earth Care, finding the money, land, or time needed to be able to do it isn't realistic. There's heavy limits on what we can and can't do, and a lot of us are those people in need of help. And that's why I want to talk about privilege for a couple minutes. The unfortunate truth is that the thing most likely to get the ball rolling right now is a certain level of privilege. I've only been able to plant this forest because I have the privilege of access to land that's been in my family for generations. And for whatever reason, I have a nervous system that can handle being broke if it means I get the freedom to live in nature. The problem, once again, is we need everyone involved, not just the privileged. Which means that those of us with privilege have an added responsibility to bring others along. Anything that set you up to be able to act in a broken world is an opportunity. And that's not just your money, class, gender, color, or country you happen to be born in, but increasingly also things like having free time or a clear mind, having had nurturing parents, or the ability to thrive under capitalism. These are things that give us a leg up, but I'd argue also give us a responsibility to do things, like learn from old trees. Old trees have what they need, and they use that position to create ecosystems where others thrive. An old tree, by ecologic standards, is rich, and by human standards is incredibly generous. They shade the young, give habitat to all sorts of bugs, feed the soil, feed us, and through it all, they only keep on growing. They use what they have to support others, and the result, when you get enough old trees together, is a forest. But that's also easier said than done. Because another thing about privilege is, it doesn't usually enjoy being noticed. There's a lot of protectors inside us who are going to try and convince us that we're not actually as privileged as we are, or that we deserve everything we have. And if I had to guess as to why that is, I'd say that when we don't feel secure in our place in the world, privilege doesn't feel like a privilege. It feels like a life raft we need to make it through the day. But given that we do have to figure out a way to weigh that life raft down in order to carry others along with us, and since it is getting in the way of supporting each other, I suspect it'd be helpful to take a closer look at how it's affecting our psychology, mainly in the way that privilege excels at helping us isolate ourselves from problems, when what's needed to support someone is the opposite, willingly involving ourselves. And for a little piece of what I mean by that, we can look at our relationship with money. People who have money, for the most part, expect to be able to use money to make problems go away. You expect to be able to go to a store, get what you need, hire the right person, and problem solved. Over time, that expectation can get so ingrained that we can forget that most of the biggest problems we're facing today can't be solved by money. In large part, they're created by money. The fracturing of social fabric, the extraction and exploitation of people and nature breaking down ecosystems. These are side effects of the impersonal qualities of money. And yet, even if we know that, we still think giving someone money is going to make our problems go away, that if we just buy the right solar panel or car, all will be made right in the world. And we're still, I'd argue, that makes us passive. It teaches us to think, why get involved if money can do the work for you? While at the same time, it flares up our expectations for easy fixes and hides away the thousands of people we rely on for even the most basic goods. Basically, it overempowers us, and that overempowers ultra-rich man-children. And where that leaves us is convinced down into our nervous system that some things we know to be good and right, like supporting others, are actually too big a hassle or have too many hurdles to actually do. And just like that, the possibility of genuine support collapses. And to be clear, I'm not trying to say that you shouldn't be donating money or that using money is inherently wrong. I'm trying to say that if you're someone lucky enough to have the privilege of money, try not to convince yourself that donating is enough. Keep in mind that it's not actually helping you develop the other skills we are going to need to develop here in order to support one another. Things like patience, listening, collaboration, slowness, and probably the most important of all, the ability to deal with the frustration of not getting your way. Now, those first two, ecologic knowledge and support, they're not going to get us anywhere if they're not part of a vision for what a coherent lifestyle looks like. It's a flaw shared by most green projects, mine included, that we can make these little bits of paradise or these miracle solutions and then still fuel them by externalizing harm onto the rest of the world. We're still strip mining DRC for our lithium batteries, clear-cutting forests for sustainable wood, and buying ecologic goods that keep people locked in factories on the other side of the planet. We want to claim to be doing good, but our lives and our actions aren't actually in agreement. The sum total effect of our lifestyles isn't keeping up with our values. And I do get that the world is fundamentally structured to exploit and extract, and it's incredibly difficult to step away from that. But that's also not really an excuse. It explains why we don't do it, and it's understandable because we're not in charge of how the world's structured, but practically, it's impossible to strip the world for parts so we can make our little islands and then still expect to survive as anything more than little islands. So if we want something more, we need to work on slowly figuring out how the craft here can stop being a craft and become a lifestyle. Where little by little, we can try aiming for something beyond just sustainability or regeneration and work towards figuring out how to make the whole of our lives something that helps the natural world, to the point where even our destructive acts can improve the resilience of the world. Just like this basket I made. It's not perfect, and I could have gone to the store and gotten a better one, but I think my making it has actually made the world a bit richer. Not because I had to plant a few new trees to make it, but because I had to get to know these willows as a species. I had to learn how they grow, how they relate to other species, how and when to prune them. And to plant them, I had to put them in context. I had to understand ecology well enough to know where they would thrive. And also I had to widen my view to learn how to provide continual care for the entire ecosystem the willows are growing in. More than anything, I had to look out and struggle to understand the world around me well enough that from now on, when I go out and destroy something, in this case a year's worth of growth, I'm able to trust that what I'm doing will actually make a positive impact on the world, and not just be a little selfish chore. I had to learn to make sure that my needs, to the best of my ability, result in a gift of destruction that improves and creates ecosystems. Having said that, getting to that level of coherence up from baskets to laptops is a stretch to say the least. Figuring out that kind of mutualism with the 1,000 different materials, processes, and people that go into making a laptop is one that'll probably take a few generations to figure out, if ever. But I do think that's the only hope for coherence in a complex world. Personally, we've got to strive to be making baskets, and be able to trust that no one upstream is harming the natural world on our behalf, which, realistically, is where all this theory bumps face first into the real world. I think a lot of people in the comments are going to want to say something like, that's great that you want all that growth, but it's not realistic on any scale large enough to actually create a living world, because that's just not how people work. And honestly, I don't think I disagree. We've got an entrenched culture of ease and comfort that sets our nervous system up to avoid the slow and careful attention needed to really learn and care about nature. We've got extractive capitalism making it feel impossible to find time or money necessary to really support anyone, and a violent industrialism that provides us with tools and food so seamlessly that it makes any desire for coherence look almost like a joke. Realistically, it's too much to get over. So much so that I'd argue a living world is genuinely too big a challenge to make happen. And it's not the job of anyone currently old enough to be watching this video. Our job is to get the ball rolling, open up the spaces, and develop the tools that the future needs. And probably the most important thing we can do, if we want any of those actions to take root, is to help the old world die. Given the current state of modernity, with its stories of the human above all else, a civilization based on infinite growth in a finite world, and the unquestionable march of progress accelerating the whole shebang, Earth has been pushed beyond their limit. So much so that if we're going to have any chance to survive as a species, I think we need to listen to Vanessa Andreotti and Hospice Modernity. In the same way we'd assist an elder at the end of their life, we can act to minimize harm and relieve pain without trying to fix the underlying and inevitable conditions from running their course. Instead of trying to solve certain problems of society, which may or may not be fixable, we can move on to giving our energy over to nurturing some alternatives that might still be in their childhood. We can tell stories about what we learned, share memories, and then let go with dignity and figure out from there what we can build. The main challenge, though, after a lifetime spent as individualists under capitalism, is that most of the tools, psychology, and strategies we're working with aren't really suited to anything other than creating repressive systems of extraction and exploitation. I happen to think that if capitalism disappeared tomorrow, chances are a lot of even the most ardent anti-capitalists would probably try and recreate some watered-down version of it the day after tomorrow. The dirty little secret of most alternatives is that we're not actually ready for them. Internally, we're clinging to the promises and expectations of the life we grew up in, and externally, we're pushing to figure out how to make our alternatives circle back to the same levels of comfort and privilege that climate change and the biodiversity crisis are going to make impossible for the majority of people. And you might think, well, that's what something like socialism is for, to equitably distribute what we have. And that's a great intention if you have it, but it doesn't account for the effects of that desire. If we distributed a good life with its access to products and money, comfort and convenience to everyone, even if we did it in a way that got rid of every billionaire, it would still accelerate the destruction of the natural world, because there's a practical barrier no ism can think its way past. If we don't have the skills to feed ourselves without destroying the planet, we can't make it through. If we don't know how to collaborate with permission, to feed and clothe ourselves with respect for people and the planet, if we haven't dealt with the generalized addictions and trauma that drive us, then our actions are bound to remake some form of capitalism. For as long as we're driven by the old colonial playbook, no alternative will be enough to get us to a living world. Because we don't just need new tools, we need new ways to make new tools. We need to challenge a belief system where the human being is above and separate from nature, and we need to be guided away from the assumption that the world is a resource to be mined at our discretion. Because if we don't, we'll continue to opt for strategies that degrade and destroy at a scale that make it impossible for any civilization of the future to get to know a buzzing, bustling, living world. So, my little piece of advice. Whatever the alternative you believe the future needs, whether that be sustainability or anti-capitalism, socialism, some form of regenerative agriculture, Marxism, whatever it is, watch out for the ghosts of modernity that will push you to continue stripping the world for parts, and figure out how to work within the permission of nature and other people. Forget about giving everyone what they want and need, and instead push to place people into the ecologic and social habitats that will help them become full and healthy humans. Challenge yourself to get better at noticing what's driving you. Is it a comfortable life where you and the people in your inner circle get everything you need? Or is it a comfortable life where everyone has what they need? And can you include a slug or a blackberry in everyone? There is an opportunity to craft a living world here, but it'll probably take a different route than what we'd expect or is comfortable to move in. And it'll probably involve things like accepting that the health or mental health crisis of anyone who wants to care for the planet is your responsibility. That anyone's economic inability to act on behalf of the planet is your responsibility, and that the risk, if we rush forward, is that the alternatives we nurture will be riddled with the same wounds of the past, and no amount of ecologic knowledge will be able to offset that. Finally, I don't do ads, but in the spirit of support, of finding an unpolished project that needs and deserves help, I'd like to suggest you look into what my brother's been up to. I might not have a functional vision of how to get to the future, but I think he's developing a really nice tool to start driving us there. His project, Foresnauts, is about developing games that we can play within nature to deal with and process all the issues we're talking about on this channel. In a nutshell, it's about creating living video games where the goal is to guide people past theory by using play and storytelling to ground us into deeper responsibility with one another and with nature. If that sounds interesting, I'll put his links in the description for you to check out. Thanks for listening.